Hey there, we are Rob and Joanna Tigan. Welcome back to the Growing Home Together podcast. We've been married for over 30 years and we've parented our 5 kids through all the ages and stages. We're excited to share our passion for caring for the soul of your family with you. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi, and welcome to the Growing Home Together podcast. Next month, our family remembers one of the most important anniversaries of our life together, the adoption day of our youngest son. And we look on that day as a blessing and a day of celebration. But for our son, that day holds a whole mix of feelings, because while he loves us and he's securely knit into the love of our family, his story holds confusion and loss that are an inherent part of a child's separation from their birth parents. And as our son grows, we want to create space in our home for him to express his emotions and to ask his questions and to be confident that he is an inherently wonderful and valuable person.
But as parents, it can be hard to know what is happening inside your adoptive child. They don't always share what they're going through. They might be acting out on emotions or beliefs they're hiding inside. And you wonder, how can we understand our child and their experience as adopted son or daughter? To help us out today, we're thrilled to have on our program Susan TeBos on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, you guys. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, Susan, you are a writer and a speaker and a Bible study leader, and you're the adoptive mom of 3 children from Siberia. That's amazing. And I love that you're also an adoption advocate, and you've authored this amazing book, We've Been There, True Stories, Surprising Insights, and Aha Moments for Adopted Teens. So we're so excited that you're going to share about that with us today.
Yeah. So can you help us, Susan, first by sharing just your own family's story of adoption and kind of what brought you to write this book?
Okay. So yes, I am a mom of 3 now older kids, but they were adopted from Russia when they were infants and toddlers. My husband, Mike, and I have been married for 27 years, so a long time. I say I'm married to a mountain biker, long distance biker, and our family is kind of involved in that. Our kids all bike as well, so that's kind of our cool connection. Our adoption story began in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think there was a big influx of adoptees internationally. So Mike and I were unlikely couple. We were professionals. We were busy with life. We were in our early 30s. And I just was praying, Lord, what's next? What do you have for us? And he showed me adoption, international adoption. And there was an article in our local newspaper, the old school newspaper. And it was an article of a couple adopting from Russia. And that was my first, awareness of international adoption. I feel kind of bad about that I didn't know that until in my 30s. But then I was drawn to that, but my husband wasn't necessarily as quickly on board as I was. So that took some prayer. It took some other like mission trips and some other things, just kind of get to the heart of where God wanted us to be in life.
Okay. So then you grew your family through adoption. And then fast forward to more recent history, and the Lord led you to write this book. So what did he do in you to make that happen?
So I think, when we grow our kids and we grow together with our kids, we find out that there are different needs that surface that we didn't anticipate. And so our kids turned into teens and some things started to surface, and I wasn't really aware at that time what that could be. I felt like there was some new acting out, some new emotions that were surfacing, and I didn't know what to do with that. And I specifically saw that with our middle son. He went from having a great childhood to some really intense anger. And I needed to get to the bottom of that. And I really wasn't sure what that was. And then I didn't do really well as a parent during that time. It was really a time of discovery on our part as parents. And at one point, I got a hold of The Primal Wound, which is a book by Nancy Verrier. And it really opened my eyes to understand the loss that our kids experience when they are separated from first mom, from their first parents. And that loss becomes a part of them. In the case of our son, I didn't know it at the time, but I felt like, after in hindsight, that anger he was expressing at me, specifically at mom, he was connected well with dad, but this was at mom. He was expressing something from maybe pre-verbal, from his being a baby, from his hurt. And so The Primal Wound, this book, really opened my eyes to discovering what our kids could be experiencing. And what our kids experienced before they came to us is a disruption in their security and even the way their brain develops. And so I thought, okay, I have this book, but it's really not attractive for teenagers. Like, how am I going to communicate this to a kid that really doesn't want to hear my voice, right?
Right.
You know how that goes.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real. And so I was with a group of moms. We were talking through all the details of this book, which I'd highly recommend, The Primal Wound, and just sorting that out. But at the same time, we were talking about we needed a resource, something that our kids would listen to, something that was from other teens or young adults. And then that just kind of that spark just grew into a flame. And that's when this book became an idea to say, okay, I'm going to try to find adopted persons that are young enough to relate to teens. Like maybe, I started out like, how about between the ages of 15 and 30 something? Somehow people who are ready to talk about their experience, not their adoption, but a slice of teen life where their loss or their grief or their anger entered in to their day to day. So they're busy thinking about prom and they're taking classes and they're going out with friends. But there's this time when this relinquishment, this loss surfaces, at least for most, and if not for all, in one way or another. And so, this book became something that I chased after. And through the miracle of social media, let's look at the positive there, is that I was able to reach out to people all over the country. And they were adopted internationally, they were adopted domestically, and through the foster care system. So it's a beautiful range of young men and women who are ready to tell their story about being teenagers and how they grappled with this and how they struggled and how they did the work or are still doing the work and how they invite the reader into their story. They're like welcoming them in and saying, I get it. I've lived this. You are not alone. And I want to tell you not only what happened to me or how I felt and how I worked my way through or whatever it was I did, but also how I'm coming out on the end of that and how I'm reaching for acceptance and peace. So that's where the book came from. It's something I wanted for my own kids as well, but I really have done it not only for teens and young adults, but for parents too.
Oh, yeah. It's an amazing window into the heart of these young people. I can't get over it. And one thing that really does jump off the page is that honesty that you mentioned and that vulnerability of the people that you were talking to. And you had said that you wish you knew how to help your son even open up to you as a parent. Why do you think that it can be difficult for kids to share the ways that they're wrestling with the loss of their first parents?
So what I think is happening with adopted teens and young adults is that it's very difficult to reopen a wound that may have been sealed shut for a long period of time. And it's been scarred over. And now all of a sudden, through triggers or something in their life or us asking questions or not asking questions, that wound hurts. And so I think of teens in the book, like I think of Zuri. She's one of the stories in the book. And I have the book in my hand, so I'm going to take a look at it. And Reed, she said, I struggled. She said, I felt awful. I mean, this is how these wounds affect our kids. She says, I felt sick and I was always tired. I didn't want to do anything. And I complained about everything. It sounds kind of like a normal teen, right?
For sure.
They are, they're just like every other teen, but they have this extra layer that they're dealing with. She said, my parents and my girlfriends noticed too and asked me what was going on, but I hid the truth. So there's that wound that it's like, if I open that up, it's really going to hurt. And can I handle the hurt? And who will help me with that hurt? And then there's another person in here. I love this one from Maria. She was adopted from Guatemala. And her insight is so good. Maria's insight is so good. She says, and she lists it here. She says, I didn't want to tell my mom stuff. I didn't want to sound hateful. I was too ashamed to express my feelings. My feelings were too hard for me to put into words. I didn't know who I was supposed to be. She said, when you think of that from a parent's perspective, these kids are really trying to sort this out. It's almost as if they're like, do I talk? Do I not talk? If I talk, is it going to be so painful? Will they get it? Will my parents understand me, or will they just brush it off as another teen kind of angsty sort of day? So there's a bunch of these stories in here that they give us insight as parents. And they say, okay, we want to talk sort of, but we're really not sure even how to do that well. And as parents, we're kind of asking you, could you give us some grace when we're angry? Could you maybe think a little bit deeper that we're maybe carrying something internally that we're trying to tamp down and stuff down, but we really need to release that well? And could you give us the soft landing space for that? And as parents, we go, whoa, that's really hard.
Right.
Because we need to slow down. And we need to be able to handle some tough stuff. And the delivery process of teenagers isn't always pretty. And I can speak from experience that our middle son was very angry and out of nowhere would have these outbursts. And we find that in the book too, that the people who are speaking about their teen years, they look back and they go, I don't know why I flipped the Monopoly game up and punched a hole in the wall, or I don't know why I was teary-eyed in my room at night or crying in the shower. In a way, we're unraveling a mystery for them when we're all trying to figure this out together. And that's what I love about this book is that for kids, they can see other people are doing this too. Other teens and young adults like them are approaching these wounds, opening them up, or looking back at how they didn't do that well and how the reader could do that differently. And then as parents, we look at the stories and we say, okay, now I got it. I see that there's something going on a little bit different than I had ever expected in our story as a family. And I need to step into that with grace and lots of forgiveness. And like my friend Cinda always says, and she's an adoptive mom, she says, nothing, this is what she says to her adopted teen girls. She says, nothing you can say will make me love you any less. And I love that reassurance. I love that support she gives. And we're going to have to do that over and over and over until it becomes truth in our kids' hearts.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think too, just from a big picture perspective, your book does serve as a really good reminder that there is a whole inner world for our kids where they are sorting these things out in their own unique way. And that's going to look different from kid to kid.
Yes.
I feel like for Rob and I, we're having to really hone in our observation skills to know when some of this stuff is backing up for our son. Like we've noticed lately that the more complimentary he is of us, the more that's showing us that he needs reassurance that we think he's pretty great, or that he might be feeling a little secure and be craving some of those words of affirmation and words of affection because he's just feeling a little unsure. And that happens to be his clue for how he lets us know that. He gets really mushy, which is very sweet, but I know it's like you're actually telling us you need something here. And then like you had described with your son, the anger was coming out. So what do you think are some clues that parents could look for to see that their child is processing something on the inside where maybe they might be able to invite them into a conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And there's probably no simple answer. And yeah, I just want to kind of say that I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm a mom. And so, while writing and gathering stories for my book, I really see clues in the storyteller. So I'll lean on what they did and take a look at what they were experiencing. So when I look at a couple stories in the book, one was, if you want to look, it was Zuri, and another one was Kira. Both of those young ladies were experiencing grief and sorrow. And so what I saw was that grief and sorrow can look like isolation, like less connection with family and friends, and more time lost like in social media. For instance, I remember my daughter having some challenges with sorrow, and she would have like a bellyache, and always be tired. And then Kira in her story talks about, just not wanting to do anything, so there's some things that kind of all of a sudden change in their mannerisms or behaviors or their energy level. And then in another story, Dylan is experiencing anger and fear, and that could look like misplaced anger, acting out, controlling everything and everybody around you. And for Dylan and some of the others in the stories that they tell, it just feels safer to them to be in control. So I think curiosity about birth family and search, it's important to pay attention to that. It looks like a renewed interest, making plans to search. Your child may even start searching social media on their own, maybe even unexpected tears through music. Or I know my daughter, whenever she would watch the musical Annie, that was a trigger for her. Hymns at church. So searching and finding birth family, you start seeing some questions surfacing. And that happened at our home too. So I would say pay attention to that. That's a really good clue that you need to engage and be intentional. And then attachment and abandonment. And I'm not covering all of them, but in attachment and abandonment, there's this lack of closeness that can occur. Oftentimes with mom, a child might be closer to dad or other family members and be pulling away from mom because being vulnerable is risky. And in some cases, kids with attachment and abandonment challenges pull away to keep that barrier up because it feels safer. So we need to be intentional looking for that. There's a story about Anna and her mom and how she felt too vulnerable to get close to her mom. And her mom always missed the cues. She didn't really understand what was going on. It's interesting when we see our children maturing through their teen years, we see so many different behaviors. It's hard to sort out. But at some point, we need to maybe step back and really look and be intentional about what's possibly changing, or even if we don't see changes, maybe it's time to just step in and start having some curiosity and asking some really good questions. So those are some clues that we can look for as parents and caregivers of our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it can be hard to hear that there aren't any easy, simple answers. I mean, we like that, I think, sometimes as parents, but that can be encouraging too, in the sense that we are all kind of learning this together. And I think your wisdom of just saying to be alert and be watching and listening and just even having those doors open. So those opportunities when they do want to bring that, cardboard piece and want to discuss those kind of things, we're open and available. So I think that's really great. Mm-hmm. What I like in this each story in the book is so unique. You've got some kids that are dealing with anger issues and some kids that are dealing with identity issues or depression. Some kids even that are throwing themselves into trying to be perfect or overachieve just to compensate for things. And some kids that struggle to feel secure in themselves and to let people in and attach to people because of the fear of loss and things like that. But are there any common threads you would say through the stories, or anything as you did these interviews and as you talked to these kids that were common with them or common in their stories?
So a common thread that really surfaced was each of these individuals over time really wanted to invest in the work that needed to be done to heal, to accept what had happened to them. I think our kids think sometimes that it was them who caused this separation, and they slowly learned it is what happened to them. And quite often you'll see a thread too here is that they can rationalize constantly like, oh yes, my birth mother was poor and could no longer care for me, or there was a one-child policy at the time in China. There's a number of reasons, and our kids can make rational sense of that. But it still doesn't change the fact that they feel something's off. So there's that common thread too, that's something off. Another wonderful common thread, which came up organically, was their faith in God. So often these kids went to the Bible to reassure themselves of their worth and their value as their core belief. And as their creator, God had met them in that place. And it doesn't mean that in that moment they were cured. I mean, this book is not a fix. We as parents can't fix them. They have to do this work. They have to receive their worth and their value in their own time. And to see how God met them in their moments of questioning, met them in their moments of fear, grief, or even just finding a birth family, met them there in their apprehension. I'm going to meet my birth mother for the first time. What does that look like? Just those kinds of threads kept surfacing.
That's great.
You know, I learned a lot about what goes on in the heart and mind of these kids from you in this book. But, you know, I have to say that I learned just a lot about you as the one who was sitting across the table and interviewing them and just taking in their stories. You know, what kind of advice would you give the parent? I know we alluded to this a minute ago, just the parent who wants to keep an open door to communicate with their child when they're ready.
So I think in advance, really fill up their love bank, if you will, with lots of deposits. You know, find out, I mean, I'm not telling you to give them the world. That's not what we're talking about. It's not about things. It's about time. It's about your presence. It's about what I've done, sit on the floor, lay on the floor with my daughter and just be there. And I remember her grieving her birth father. She never met. We found out through a birth family search that he had passed away. And I remember the grief she went through and the long conversations and a lot of her trying to work through what was going on in her heart, and me just laying there, being present, not saying a word, not trying to fix, not trying to end the sentence with a period, exclamation point, let's move on. No, it was laying on the floor and breathing it in and letting her breathe it out, if you will. And then I think of the stories in the book, and I think of Derek's dad. He's a high schooler, and his dad just really jumped on board. And okay, if Derek wanted to run a half marathon, his dad would train with him. If Derek wanted to learn to lift weights, his dad did it alongside him. If he wanted to bike or be in a play or whatever he wanted to do, his dad took the similar interest. And he also, during that biking, lifting weights time, they would talk about life and they would talk about spiritual things. And Derek would open up to his dad, and his dad could answer questions about just being a kid and being a teen and learning how to find yourself and what's it like to be an adult, and what if I don't feel like I belong or I don't know my future, and just dad being able to speak into that and say, you know, all of us takes time, giving his wisdom, in our rearview mirror, we have some wisdom to share. And sometimes in those softer moments when we're connecting well and we're lifting weights or doing yoga with our kids or whatever we're doing, eating ice cream, we set up that space for them to welcome our voice and to welcome our wisdom. And if we try to impart our wisdom on them in the heat of the moment, and I think we all know this, right? And I failed in this, I'm going to admit, when my son got angry at what I thought was me, and I felt it was me, I tried my best. I'm a grace-based parent girl. I've got the book, I've memorized it. I applied the grace, but there were times when I just, I felt like I was going into lecture mode, and I learned real quick, that's when they shut down. They don't want mama's voice. So those are some of the things that we can do to prep the space or to be present in our kids' story. So when they're ready, we've created that space for them.
That's good. I noticed in some of the stories that the parents would blame themselves for their kids' struggles quite a bit. And they did all they could to support their kids and love their kids, but they still felt like maybe it wasn't enough. So what would you say to the mom or dad that is putting their kids' problems and choices on their own shoulders?
Okay, so there's this tension where we want to have the best for our kids, and we're watching them grow, we're watching them become young adults, and we see things happening that we would not want for them. And quite often we carry that personally. It's as if our influence hasn't impacted them to the point where we felt it should. And I think in this first, situation, I think of my own where I knew I needed to give my kids more time to do what they needed to do, and I needed to step back. Like, I feel like I carried their burdens, and I'm not saying this well, but I need to walk alongside them. It's too heavy for me to carry everything for them or to have every expectation of where they should be. And then another side of this is that, some of our teens do have some attachment issues, some attachment behaviors that distort our relationship with them. And we can think it's all about us. For instance, in the book, there's a mom and daughter that I interview. We're sitting around their kitchen table, and it took me 6 months to arrange this interview. And I think about Anna, who is so brave to finally sit down with us and to say in this setting that she has an attachment concern. She's not attached well to her mother. And to say that in front of her mother. And then to have her mom come back in the story and say, Anna, I thought this was about me as your mom. I thought there was something about me and I was to blame. And Anna saying, no, Mom, it's not about you. It's me. It's too vulnerable for me to get too close to you or to others because I've lost before. I've lost my first family. I've lost my foster family. And if I get too close to you, which looks like I'm not very friendly and kind in the moment, if I get too close, I may lose you. And that would break my heart. So what would that be like? That's that underlying story that comes to light, that lightens a dark area. We always know when light comes into a dark area, we can see better. And for Jamie, Anna's mom, she was just relieved. She was relieved to know that it's not about me. It's not how I failed somewhere along the way. It's really what happened to my daughter and how we're working that out. And for me, I've had that same experience as a mom. And I have to give myself a lot of grace. I think Jamie learned too. We as parents, we have to give ourselves grace over and over again to realize that in these seasons where it's tough, the teen years are tough no matter what, but when these attachment challenges surface, or we've seen them throughout the entire relationship, that when the light shines on those behaviors and that the true story is revealed, we see, okay, this isn't about us. This is about what happened to our kids. And that's, in a way, for me and for Jamie, it was a huge relief. And I think parents, when they read this, they'll be relieved as well that their part that they play in the lives of their children are worthy and good and beautiful, and that will all level out at some point. And I see that in my own kids as they're in their 20s now. Things are softening, and that their brains are growing and their hearts are healing, and they've been doing the work, and it's coming to a softer place for us in our relationships.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I know for me, I've done a lot of that second guessing. Like if I had done a better job as a mom, maybe my child wouldn't be struggling so much. I mean, we can get in that loop, even with our biological children. I think that's, as parents, we're just maybe fundamentally insecure sometimes. And one thing that has given me comfort sometimes is just knowing that God is the author of our family and not me, and God had chosen our son. We didn't choose him. It seemed like just a random winter night when we got the call, like, hey, can you come pick up this little guy who needs somewhere to stay? I mean, we had zero influence over which child ended up in our arms that night. And of course, our son had no control over what happened to him either. And God just orchestrated the story from the beginning. And so even when I feel unworthy, I just have such comfort in knowing that this was all the Lord's idea. And we're not in this by ourselves, which is really comforting. And you had mentioned how a thread running through the book is that so many of these young people had found comfort in the Lord too. Mm-hmm. So what is it about finding Jesus that really makes such a fundamental difference for our kids?
When I look at these stories, the way these storytellers reached out to Jesus, I think that there is a spiritual element at work in their lives. And I look at my daughter, who is strong in her faith. And of course, it wanes and it ebbs and flows as she's growing to know who God is in her life. And I think that for those in the book and for my kids, that God provides an anchor, and that we look at his character and we look at his love and we look at him reaching to us and meeting us as we are. And these kids are hurt sometimes or questioning and wondering, and they can always be secure in knowing that God will receive them as they are in their brokenness. It's the gospel, right? It's just that saving grace that he loves me no matter what. And there's nothing I can do that will separate us from him. And I think that's what these storytellers really grab onto, is I need to keep myself close to God. And when I'm close to God, he will stay close to me. So I think that that's the foundation that they stand on. And it's a healing foundation, and it may contradict what we see in culture and what our society speaks to us today. But having a foundation that stands strong and is not like sifting sand, as they say in the scriptures, is I think that just adds to their confidence and joy and peace. And I'm thankful that they shared that in this book. I'm thankful that they were authentic and willing to say, my God is great enough and he can handle who I am, and I am strong because of him.
Yeah, that's great. And, I will say that your book is really encouraging as an adoptive parent, just being able to read these stories and understand that, the title, We've Been There. I think, for kids to understand that they're not alone, but also for parents to understand they're not alone as well as we walk with our adoptive kids, and the different challenges that they're going through. And, I would say this book would be a great encouragement for teens that aren't adopted or parents that don't have adoptive kids as well, because the stories really, as you said earlier in the program, they're normal teens. Mm-hmm. They just have an extra layer. And so you see some of those same insecurities and those different things we've wrestled with our biological kids too, over the years. And so it's just a phenomenal book. And I would imagine there's a lot of parents that are feeling that same need for Jesus's strength and hope and encouragement as they walk with their kids in and through the different stages of their adoption story. So I was wondering if you could pray for our listeners today and just ask God to strengthen and encourage them as they walk.
Okay. I would love that. Okay. So as we settle our hearts, I just say, Lord, may you open our hearts to both the beauty and brokenness in our teens' lives. And may you give us eyes to see and hearts to connect well with them during this sensitive season of life. And may we extend grace and compassion in a supernatural way so we may participate in the healing and wholeness you have for them. So thank you, Lord, for calling us your beloved and extending unconditional love that renews us each day. We love you. Amen.
Amen. Well, I know that our friends are definitely going to want to go straight to get your book after this podcast episode. Where is the very best place to find your book and to connect with you online?
Okay, so to connect with me online, you can go to susantebos.com. So pretty simple, just my author name. And Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Christian Books, any online book retailer, you can find my book, and libraries. Libraries have it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, that's great. I know it's a book to read and share with the other families in your life for sure. And we'll make sure you check out the show notes, everybody. We'll have as many of those links to that information as we can.
Yes, and we want to thank you for joining us today on the Growing Home Together podcast program. And we would love to connect with you online as well. If you'd like to go over to growinghometogether.com. We have lots of resources for you on how to pray for your kids and how to connect with your kids and other free downloads as well over there. So please check that out. And we just want to thank you for joining us today. And at Growing Home Together, we're caring for the soul of your family.
And we're growing home together with you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you, Susan. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Growing Home Together podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and found some valuable insights to help you care for the soul of your family. Remember to check out growinghometogether.com for more resources. And stay tuned for our next episode coming your way soon.